Welcome to the Quality Meat Scotland podcast. Industry updates and best practice to promote, support, develop and protect the Scottish red meat sector.
Hello and thank you very much for downloading this. I'm Mark Stephen. This is the sixth and final podcast in our Monitor Farm series. Now, each farm involved has opened itself up to external scrutiny and fundamentally questioned the old way of doing things. In a rapidly changing environment where subsidies are going to be reduced, the effects of Brexit are still becoming apparent, and pressure for farms to become carbon neutral is growing, questioning the old way of doing things is probably the sensible thing to do right now. Andrew Booth is a sixth-generation farmer from Aberdeenshire. He grows high-quality arable crops on his 1,700-acre Savock Farm. He was a monitor farmer for 3 years and prides himself on being innovative and adaptable. Peter Chapman has South Redbog Farm near Strichen. Peter's an early adopter of using technology to improve his production efficiency. His philosophy for crop production is based on attention to detail and on maintaining a very healthy soil, supporting a high-input, high-output management regime. Hello to you both. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
The chance to do this podcast has been a long time coming. Peter, I take it you had problems with your harvest?
Well, no, we had a very good harvest. I would say it was one of the easiest we've had, but that caused its own issues. That nearly every day was a busy day, so it was difficult to find a slot to get this podcast recorded. So, but no, it was a very good harvest, a very easy harvest, and I wish we could have one like that every year.
I'm delighted to hear it. Very difficult to schedule a day for a podcast knowing that it's going to be raining 3 days in advance. Andrew, can you tell me a wee bit more about your business, please?
Certainly. So yeah, as you said, Mark, we're running about 1,700 hectares just north of Aberdeen. We're about 10 minutes north between Newburgh and Ellen on the coast, varied between owned, rented and contract farmed. We grew a variety of crops from everything with traditional spring barley for malting, wheat mainly for animal feed, oilseed rape. But about 4 years ago, we put in we have an AD plant on the farm, and we've now introduced more grass in rotation as well as rye and triticale, which allows us to get an 8-year rotation on the farm. And we also grow oats winter and spring, gluten-free ones, for which we also process within our own mill on the farm.
I haven't seen your operation personally, but my colleague Ewan McElraith has. You know, the anaerobic director, he says logistically it was one of the most impressive things he's ever seen. It ran like a railway station. Yeah,
no, it's something, because the market is the price isn't within reason a fixed price, so we don't have the benefit of variety. We're the feedstock supplier, so we don't have the benefit of any moving commodity prices, for example, like the gas price just now. So our costs and our overheads have to be run that's where we can help make our margin. So when it comes to the harvesting day, the day Ewan came, it's orchestrated, and we've got an excellent team. Not me, that run that very, very efficiently, to the point that even every subcontractor that comes in to haul silage or rye will get the following day, there's a wee chart of how much diesel they have used per ton, which they then goes on a chart for a win for a case of beer at the end of the week or something like that. So it's always, my tractor is better than your tractor. Well, no, I'll tell you exactly whose tractor is better than who. And it's, it could actually be the driver opposed to the tractor. So yeah, no, everything is managed and measured in that part of the business.
Excellent. Peter, could you do me the same thing? Just tell me a bit more about your business.
Aye, we're farming up in the northeast corner, about 10 miles south of Fraserburgh, 10 miles north of Peterhead. We're just over 1,000 acres, all owned, farm with my wife Grace. And we are mainly arable, 850 acres arable, which is split into 5 blocks, growing feed wheat, winter oilseed rape, winter barley and spring barley. And as I said, it all goes for feed. We don't grow any malting crops. The remainder of the farm is either temporary grass, permanent grass or rough grazing, which supports a suckler herd of about between 70 and 80 cows, all to the Aberdeen Angus bull, and everything's finished in-house. And we also have 4 800 kilowatt wind turbines. 2 went up in 2008 and 2 went up in 2013, which gives us a very nice diversified income.
No, it must be a handy thing to have. Why, Andrew, did you decide to join the Monitor Farm project?
I think at the time it was in the farm in our business, we were a bit of a crossroads. We had a farm shop at the time, and we felt felt that we'd spent too much effort on it, and had spent less effort on the farm. And I wanted to focus back on that, and I knew a few people who'd done it previously. In fact, my brother-in-law in New Zealand had done it many, many years ago when it was in the concept stages, where the idea came from. And I remember somebody once saying it kind of accelerates your progress in your business. It's, a 10-year progression you can do in 3 years of the Monitor Farm. And we were going through change, and it was succession. It was big investments to be done on the farm. And as a business and as a family, we're quite good at sharing, I would say. Peter might say differently. But I thought it was, a good opportunity to glean some information from other people, from our peers, and, Peter being one of them as well, and see if we could improve our farming business.
How did you find the whole process, Peter?
I thought it was brilliant. I mean, I think Andrew was a model monitor farmer. There was small areas of improvement to be done. It was a well-run business anyway, but, he was accepting of criticism. He was very willing to adopt recommendations from the community group or the management group. And I think over the 3 years, a lot was achieved. And I think the people who attended the meetings always got something out of the meetings. And I think it was an exemplary group. I've been involved in a couple of monitor farms, and certainly I would say a lot was achieved in Andrew's one, and a lot of that was to do with Andrew himself and how he approached it.
Did it actually work, Andrew? I mean, when you say you can take 10 years improvement and compress it into 3, is that what happened?
It depends how you measure that. I think in terms of how if you look where we were back in 2011 or whatever it was, we are now farming 4 or 5 times as many acres. I don't know, but that doesn't mean it's 4 times bigger. It's 10 acceleration. There's a couple of major things. The legacy, I would believe, I always say, of the project has been the benchmarking group, which we may come on to a bit more later. But when we were looking to change our business and take on more contract farming, within that, I was able to look within the benchmarking group at other businesses in there and say, well, actually, what kind of business do I want to be? Do I want to be a sole trader or a partnership business, or one who's got one employee or a few employees, or a large scale business that has got acres that's reducing its fixed costs? And it wasn't to say that was exactly how my business was go, but it gave us an idea of the different types of farming businesses that were out there. And that was a huge tool to allow us to make our next decisions.
Is there anything actually, because people are coming onto your farm, they're looking at your business in quite some detail, and they're making comment on it. Is there anything that you suddenly thought, blimey, why have I not seen that before?
Oh, there was plenty of things in that. I think rotation was probably one of those key drivers. Peter, who was the chair of our management group, was, as you heard from his summary of his business, has got a very strict and regimented rotation. Now, we were basically probably working at times depending on weather and under pressure, or weather windows or time windows, and having a shop as well, because that took precedence sometimes as well. We were just putting crops in where we had a clear field and weren't really planning it. We've moved completely away from that and are very regimented on our rotation, which or rather than chasing the buck, rather than saying we'll fill the whole place with oilseed rape, which we can't do, and because that's at some point it's going to come back and bite you, and you're going to look at it far more holistically rather than just on a year-to-year basis. So there's certainly things within the group definitely said that we're complicating the issues or we're inefficient, that you thought you got to have there's no doubt you have to have a thick skin to do it, but you also have to be willing to accept. There's no point in just saying, well, we've always done it this way, because that's not the point of it at all.
To be honest, I can see what Andrew gets out of it as a host farmer, because his business is coming under the microscope. He's being examined, it's being improved. What do you get out of being part of the process, Peter?
It's the over the fence farming thing, really. I mean, we all like to look at how our neighbours are doing things, good or bad. But it was a managed situation where, we were specifically looking at maybe the issues that the community group felt were affecting their own farms as much as Andrew's, and then just taking a managed approach as to how we would deal with them. And I mean, one major thing with Andrew's group was grain drying. So we had with 2 or 3 really good meetings where we all looked at grain drying systems and which was the best way to go. Now that applies to everyone in Aberdeenshire. Everybody's drying grain, and we all want to have the most efficient systems available for our farms. So that, that's one example. And also, as Andrew said, the Arble Business Group was formed out of it as well, where we did the benchmarking through crop bench and latterly with farm bench, which lets you drill in far, much further down into your business and see where the issues lie in your business. I mean, it's optional to be a member of the business groups, but I mean, we had a strong group, and I think we all learned a lot from working with staff like HDB, with the likes of Gavin, who has a real business mind in him, and we managed to drill down into several topics on everybody's farms and see where we could all improve.
Also, just the other thing you're saying, what do other people get out of it? We were a customer-focused business and still are, because a lot, whether we're a farm shop or whether we're a OCO or whether we're a contract farmer, we're a customer-focused business. So when these other farmers were giving up their time, their day to come to one of our meetings, my kind of idea said to the group, they must go home with at least one message. You must have at least their one take home every day, because there's no point, or they won't come back. You won't get that repeat customer. Another point that, what did they get out of it and how involved the management group were, which they didn't offer, they didn't take up, and Peter might follow up on this, was I offered them to sell all my grain one year. I wouldn't make any decision on that, but they weren't so keen on that one, were you, Peter?
No, I would think lawyers would have needed to be involved in that. Stepped away from that one quite quickly. But I mean, it was a tremendous offer. I mean, good God, how many people would potentially hand over their year's harvest for an intelligent group of people? I know they are, but I mean, it's selling grain is like, so this year is I guarantee nobody's going to hit the top of the market this year, and if they have, they're a downright liar, I would say. But no, that was an example of how good a monitor farmer Andrew was. He was prepared to do that as a tool for other people to learn from.
That is an astonishing offer, Andrew. Why did you make it?
I think marketing, if somebody wants to look on the website or the old papers, there's a phenomenal blueprint of how to market your grain. That was written by one of the management team, and that to not the actual blueprint, not actually hitting the highs and the lows, just that is on there. And I felt that our marketing was probably a bit like our rotation at times. It was a bit, we had pooled business, because what they're saying is some should be pooled. Now, at that time, all our oilseed rate was pooled, and we forward sold some wheat, and we spot sold some barley, and that was driven by storage as well. It was not just our marketing; it was driven by our storage. And I felt that when we looked at the farm bench side of things, when we looked at the benchmarking, actually, yes, yield is king to a point, but your marketing is just as important. Fixed costs and variable costs are, well, we found out the variable costs were fixed and fixed costs were variable. That's a whole different story. But the marketing was hugely important. So I felt, well, actually, guys, you can't do, let's say you can't do any worse than I can do. So let's all go out, you guys go out and sell the grain.
What would you have done if they'd cocked it up completely?
I would have. I'm sure I would be still be dining out in it, Mark. And I suppose for a podcast like this, I would be sitting thinking very pretty, having quite a wind up with Peter.
It's always nice to work with somebody else's money, I suppose. But I think for my sanity and Andrew's sanity, I think we were best to leave that one alone, and then discuss the results at the end of the year as to how we got on with our own strategies. But no, a tremendous offer, but no, I think it was the right thing to decline.
It was mentioned earlier, the benchmarking group. How did that perform? What was the value of it?
So as Peter said, the benchmarking group came through the management group originally, and our agricultural business group, I think it's called. And it was the very early days of HD or HGCAs at the time, Farm Bench. And we were early adopters of it. And I suppose the first few years was actually just about gathering information. It was quite painful or monotonous, but actually once you got that information and after sort of year 3, it probably actually really gathered momentum personally once the monitor farm had finished, because at that stage you're then dealing with some historical information from 3 years plus. You've probably had 3 or 4 different types of harvests in terms of yield. You've had 3 or 4 different types of harvests in terms of the market opportunities. And so, and as Peter said, we could drill down to different things. We could look at our fixed costs and we could look at our variable costs and really understand where people, what different businesses, and it's a closed group. It's a closed group in terms of once you're in, it's open to all. If you share a couple of years worth of information, whatever happens in there stays in there, and everyone's very open. And that is probably the biggest benefit. As much as the benefit now about the benchmarking is looking at your figures and looking at what you've done against your peers or against last year, it's actually about the networking within the group and even just being able to, out with the group, having that. And we probably all knew each other, but we didn't know each other that well. And, now that we kind of know bits of our business, then you could, if you've got a problem, you can phone and ask, or what have you done differently from that? And as Peter says, it's that over the fence farming and learning from other people.
Mm-hmm. But we always said that the figures were the beginning, the starting point. You spent a wee while going through the figures for that year's harvest, but it was the discussion afterwards as to what had worked that year, why it did work that year, sharing information, what varieties worked, what fungicides, things like that worked. But I mean, there were different businesses, big businesses, small businesses, and it was just looking what worked for each farm, and if there was anything we can learn from each other. It's all about sharing and learning from each other, really. But the figures were really the starting point, and then it was a discussion after that where we probably gained the most.
See, this is what I find fascinating about this, because historically, and I'm saying this as an industry outsider, in my opinion, farmers did not share historically. I mean, quite the reverse. I remember flying out of a Boyne airfield in a glider, and I was talking to the pilot, and I said, "Who comes on these trips?" And he says, "We'll get a lot of farmers." He says, "But they never want to fly over their own farm. They usually want to fly over everybody else's farms, so they could look down and observe and be critical." Now, in the past, I mean, literally, it was never mind over the fence. It was actually looking straight down at somebody else's farm. This is a complete sea change. It's working much more cooperatively.
It is, and I mean, it's what I always say, if you excuse my grammar, if you want to know what makes the good guys good, we need to be able to compare and contrast and see what's working in one farmer's farm. We all know who the good farmers are in the area, but it's nice to know why, because in Aberdeenshire, lots of areas of Aberdeenshire, our soils are not inherently fertile. We've got to really work on it, and it's the farm factor, it's the farmer factor that quite often makes a difference. And if guys are prepared to share, which I always am, I'll tell anybody what I'm up to. If we can share and help one another, then hopefully it brings the whole industry up to a better level.
What do you see as being the real challenges facing Scottish farmers over the next, say, 5 or 10 years?
There's a number of things I would say, but in no particular order. And just following on from that conversation, farmers themselves not willing to change is a challenge, and I think that's the first thing that we've got to look at, and without getting into a whole subsidy discussion and subsidies stifling innovation, potentially those kind of things. So, but they're required because we know they're required, but it's getting them to the right place. So, like that's one aspect. Next 5 years, look at if you take it today's face value. Energy prices, fertilizer prices, that's something that is going to be, hugely important in our decision-making process. That's going to make a really interesting benchmarking. The benchmarking group this year is going to be very easy because we probably bought fertilizer cheap and sold the crop high. Next year is going to be, the budget one for next year is going to be far more exciting than this year's one, I'd imagine. So, where can we get other sources of fertilizer, or how can we improve, or in such like? So that's another one. I think our markets in the last 12 months is going to be in a supply chain. That is going to be our bargaining tool. I think let's look at the positives are, yes, we can import food. There's no doubt about that. But I think if we can show that we can produce it at a level that people are willing, I'm not saying it has to be cheap, but actually just a decent level, at a decent price, supply chain to the manufacturers and then to the supermarket, guaranteeing that kind of supply chain and that collaborative approach is probably going to be the biggest thing we need to work on as an industry. That takes in your carbon aspect and your environmental credentials, although from our own experience in the last 12 months, the supermarkets or the customer is less concerned about your environmental credentials at this given time. They're more concerned about your supply credentials.
I mean, what's becoming certainly apparent in the last 6 months, labour is going to be a huge issue, whether it be obviously in the processing side. What's happening with the pig industry at the moment, it's just criminal. Input supply. Can we get fertilizer? We're all screaming about the price of it. There might become a stage where we can't get it, and that's just one element of it. And also, I would say, political side of it obviously is the attitude of the national government and the devolved governments, not necessarily supporting farmers, but giving us a clear direction as to where they want us to go. That's obviously going to affect a lot of what we do in the next 10 years, I would say. So it's interesting times, there's no doubt about it. There's going to be a lot of folk fall by the wayside, I think, if you're not on your game and as efficient as possible. But there'll be opportunities for guys that are prepared to drive forward and can do the job properly.
Is this an argument, Andrew, for working more cooperatively as an industry? I suppose the Monitor Farm concept, can it help people actually address those challenges?
Yeah, I would say collaborative working opposed to cooperative, and I don't know if there's actually a difference in that in the dictionary. So my collaborative working, I would suggest, is like-minded people working together. Cooperative, I would liken that to just being an industry, everyone working together with lots of different visions and ways forward. So I would, if there was a difference, that's how I would kind of. So I think collaborative working is vital, but you need the like-minded people with the same vision to work together for that to work.
I suppose with
what hat you put on here, Peter?
I was I'm vice chairman of Ringlink, so from a Ringlink point of view, there's obviously huge advantages when it comes to sharing of resources. I think the Ring does a good job of that. With my Scottish agronomy hat on, cooperative approach to learning, trial side of the thing, sharing information, whether it be things like regenerative farming, if you can get a group of folk together to work together to investigate that side of the thing. There's obviously examples of bad cooperative practice in agriculture for the last 50 years. But there's good examples as well, a lot of good examples. And I think we are better working together if we can, without a doubt. And I think the Monitor Farm element is part of that. I think if we can share information, share good practice together, I think it can only be a good thing.
Final question to you, Andrew. Do you think the Monitor Farm model needs to evolve?
100%. I think it needs, like farming, everything needs to evolve. So what it evolves to, I'm not entirely sure. I think this year is obviously created with the Zooms and Teams and the virtual meetings and such like. There's another way of tapping into different meetings. I spent last winter and first lockdown on many a different Zoom call in Middle England, probably somewhere where it was being hosted originally, but listening to speakers that probably wouldn't have travelled this far north potentially. So that's been a massive positive. But there's a lot to be said to doing the face-to-face, but this hybrid version would hopefully be the way forward. But I think there's aspects of the monitor farm, the foundations of the monitor farm shouldn't change. So the monitor farm itself, the farmer, the willing farmer, and a good management group shouldn't change. How they present it to their effectively, let's say, going back to the community, their customers, whatever way you want to look at it, stakeholders. I think that's probably that probably does need to change, evolve.
We haven't really mentioned much about facilitation. I think we were extremely lucky to have a really good facilitation team in Jim Booth and Peter and Amy and Gavin, who encouraged us to take ownership of the group ourselves and drive it forward. And if you get the correct facilitation, it's endless what you can achieve. I mean, I would say the only thing that I would criticise the monitor farms for during our time was that there wasn't enough interaction with our groups throughout the country. We kind of concentrated on our own wee corner, and it would have been nice to have done the same thing with even groups in England and Wales. But there was a small element of that, but I think there needs to be much more of that to learn lessons from other parts of the country as well as our own corner.
Been fascinating stuff. Andrew Booth and Peter Chapman, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that.
Yep, no problem.
Aside from this podcast, there are another 5 featuring farmers who've taken part in the Monitor Farm scheme. If you haven't already heard them, there might be material or ideas contained within them that you find useful. Until the next podcast, I'm Mark Stephen. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Quality Meat Scotland podcast. For news and to listen back to previous episodes of the podcast, visit qmscotland.co.uk. For Scotch beef, Scotch lamb and specially selected pork recipe videos and inspiration, visit www.scotchkitchen.com or follow Scotch Kitchen on Facebook, Instagram or Twitter.